As I mentioned earlier, I remember first time I was asked to fill in for Tom was close to Valentine's Day, and he had already put the title in the torch called The Book of Love. And I didn't know what he was going to preach on with that title, but all I could think of was the old doo-wop song. And some of you who were here that time remember we actually sang doo-wop in church. But even then, I don't think the polls showed that there was much groundswell for marriage equality. There was a big groundswell for what was called civil unions. And then there was kind of a drop-off of support for marriage equality. Then comes along November 6th of this year, and a historic change appeared on the ballots. Then a few weeks later, just this week, we heard President Obama proclaim in his second inaugural address these words: "Our journey is not complete until our gay brothers and sisters are treated like anyone else under the law. For if we are truly created equal, then surely the love we commit to one another must be equal as well." Wow. In a year, the cutting edge moved. Where are we going to go? For one thing, marriage equality won big at the ballot. For 32 consecutive state ballots where marriage equality had been on the ballot, it was defeated. The score was 0-32. Then this last time, this election day, there were wins in Maine and Maryland and Minnesota and Washington State. Maine approved marriage equality at the ballot, first one, by a 53-47 victory. Then in Maryland, the wild card was President Obama's statement of support back in the summer, and what that did was to offer a new opportunity for African American voters to change. They went from 60% opposed to 60% in favor in a matter of weeks. Then in Minnesota, Michelle Bachmann and her friends had placed an amendment to ban gay marriage on the ballot, and it lost by several points. And then finally, in Washington State, a similar referendum to defeat marriage equality was itself defeated. So now Maine and Maryland and Washington State have joined the 6 other states and the District of Columbia in allowing gay couples to marry. And across the country, public opinion of same-sex marriage actually has been edging so slowly toward acceptance. In fact, it wasn't until 2010 that there was a slight tipping in favor in some of the polls. Other research shows that one of the things that is common to opposition and one of the factors that has to do with support, are you a religious fundamentalist or not? That's a big decider. What about your age? The younger you are, the more in favor. The amount of higher education, that matters. There are places where you live in the Northeast or in the West Coast or in other urban areas where there's an artistic, cultural community and people are around people that are in some way already sharing in a same-sex marriage. Now, for several years, the polls have shown a very wide partisan division. 57% of Democrats in the most recent polls of 2011 supported gay marriage, 27% of Republicans. What interests me in terms of these trends is there was little change from the polls in 2003 and the polls in 2009. No, they kind of stayed the same. So what happened right after that? It seemed that some groundswells were beginning to appear. As I mentioned, the youth. Americans born between 1980 and 1991, 61% found nothing wrong with marriage equality. But the older generation, there's not a single state in the Union where more than 35% of 65 and older people favor marriage equality. And those in between 65 and 35, they're kind of swing votes making up their mind. Well, when the Defense of Marriage Act was signed way back in 1996, only 25% of the public supported it. But today, it's switched over, almost a complete groundswell. But it's not uniform. You know, one of the things that's interesting in changes is, it doesn't rain in everywhere in the valley, right? Well, this support doesn't uniformly move. States like Massachusetts, Rhode Island, California, New York, 60% favorable. The states that surround Utah, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, Arizona, 45%. Utah, they're having this argument about whether they should call that school down there Dixie. I can understand why, because the lowest states in favor of marriage equality are Utah, Kentucky, South Carolina, West Virginia, and Mississippi, all under 25%. So we do live in Dixie in a way that we haven't realized. So what do we make of this? Several observations. Sociologists study what's called the building of critical mass. And it grows slowly, and then it sort of tips very quickly. And part of that is because people are looking around and nobody I know is in favor of this, so I guess I'm not either. And then grandma says, well, I'm not in favor of this, and my daughter isn't, but they've got a whole bunch of grandkids, and that's all they talk about. They bring their friends in from high school and college, and that's just a different world. That's not how I was raised. But I'm not as against it as I might have been, because this is my family. So you see these little things that are not easily measured as trends go on. There's also two kinds of ways of measuring movement. In the Greek New Testament, there are two words for time. One is chronos, K-R-O-N-O-S, which is measurable time, the time in the morning, the time at night, measurable time. And then there's this word kairos, K-A-I-R-O-S, which means timing, or the right time. And to tell a spiritual story, a narrator tells it was time for this to happen. Well, what time was it? No, it was the timing. A kairotic moment is when something major happens. Moses was born, or a prophet arose. Jesus was born. What? At the timing, when the fullness of time came. So one of the ways to look at what's going on is to say, this is not understandable by measurable time, but we have experienced a kairotic moment. And I want you to remember, because they don't happen all along, and they don't happen every day or every year. I suppose another aspect that led to this being a kairotic moment is the opposition splintered and went off in directions that the very people that they might have tried to persuade, they insulted them. So, if you're going to insult people, don't generally move your way. So that was a part of it. What's actually going on, I think, is people begin to see that their cause is on its way out, there's a marketing crisis among all the fundraising groups and all the activist groups. Our side is shrinking. I got to make sure I get the lion's share of the market. That's how I explain some folks in the fundamentalist wing, a James Dobson from Colorado or a Mike Huckabee from Arkansas, who are competing each other. Who can say the most outrageous thing? They're not interested in folks like us. They're interested in the shrinking market and how they need to get their whole part of it. Well, as a person that studied these kinds of trends, that's a sign that they all realize their side is losing. And it's not about winning anymore. It's about holding on to your market share. One last thing, I can't help but think, okay, with all of these movements going on, what's going to happen to the Supreme Court? They've decided to take this up later in the spring. What clues can we have? Are they going to be saying, I'm sorry, folks, you just thought it was inevitable or even probable. We're going to take it back to the impossible with our decision. Is that what they'll do? Or will they somehow be a part of the move toward the inevitable? What clues do we have? The one clue I think is significant is back in 2003, there was a case that came before them, Lawrence versus Texas. And in a 6-3 ruling, the court struck down the sodomy law in Texas and, by extension, invalidated sodomy laws in 13 other states, making same-sex sexual activity legal in every U.S. state and territory. And, of course, that overturned all other. So I have to think, will someone like Scalia say, we believe in infidelity, but we don't believe in fidelity. So we're going to make it possible for people to have sex outside of marriage, but we're not going to let people have sex inside of marriage. That's the dilemma, as I see, that will come before them. Well, what to do next? Let me close by saying what I intend to do. Down on this courthouse, down on the 21st and State, on Valentine's Day, there is going to be a group of couples who will come before the Marriage License Bureau and say, we would like a marriage license. And of course, the answer is going to be no. But I'm going to recruit some serenaders, some choir members, to come down there and sing, I don't know, I'll be loving you always, or Here Comes the Bride, whatever all the wedding songs that are easy to sing. We're going to have a chorus serenading the couples. And some of you might want to decide to do that. Even if you can't sing, come and join and mouth. You know, Beyonce can lip sync, so can you. But that's what my next step is, because it feels like I've been moving. There's a kairotic moment about to happen in Salt Lake City where they have to say, no, you have to stay in what we consider an immoral relationship, but you can't become a part of a moral relationship. As a minister, I intend to say, I don't think that's the way we ought to go. So there's going to be some of these little leaflets. There's even going to be a sign-up sheet out on the welcome table. And so I encourage you and invite you to join me in figuring out how we stay on the cutting edge now that it has moved. So let it be.